on electrochemical energy conversion and storage. So today we have with us Dr. H.P. Suresh and we delivering a talk on systems approach for design and operation of rechargeable batteries. Welcome, Dr. H.P. and over to you. Reshmi, you're not audible. You need to unmute yourself.
Uh, Hi, hope you are able to hear me now. Sorry for the delay. There was some technical issue. I couldn't turn off my mic. So I hope you are able to see my presentation screen. If not, just let me know.
Yes, it's visible and you're loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so in the last talk, what we have discussed is that we have gone through an overview of various models available in the literature for rechargeable batteries. So in this talk, as I mentioned in the last lecture, this is a bit more advanced. I would like to give you a flavor of various research that is happening in the rechargeable batteries area, especially the simulation-based research that is happening in the rechargeable batteries area. And some of the works that we are focusing from our research group. And towards the end of the talk, I will, depending upon the time, of course, I'll also give you a perspective on electric vehicles side and introduce you to some of the research opportunities in the electric vehicles area. Okay. So, as I mentioned before, almost all of you would be logging into this talk using a lithium-ion battery run device, right? So all of you will be owning one or two lithium-ion battery run device, but I don't know whether you've actually gone, when you purchase this device, whether you have gone and read the manual where they've talked about the how to use the batteries. So recently I bought a battery run device, it's a camera, and this is a manual regarding the battery. Okay, so if you simply look at it, what you will see is that it is mentioned. It is mentioned that you should not use the battery at ambient temperatures below 0 degrees Celsius, which is fine for almost everywhere in India, except in very extreme conditions, or above 40 degrees Celsius. See, in India, most of the time in summers, the temperature goes above 40 degrees Celsius, and they are not even recommending to use it in those conditions. Failure to observe this precaution could damage the battery or impair its performance. Capacity may be reduced and charging times may increase. So as you can see here, there is a safe zone of operating condition for even for temperature, and even the ambient temperatures that we have in India in most of the locations during summers are outside these limits. So we are not really operating it in the safest conditions. Now, I'm sure you might be familiar with the incident that happened for Samsung Galaxy Note 7. It kind of exploded and so on. So even now, when you enter a airport or when you are trying to board, people they ask us not to carry Samsung Galaxy Note 7 in our check-in luggage. And similarly, there is also one Apple product as well. So even now, they have those restrictions because it is expected that it might have explosions in extreme conditions, since you are flying at very high altitude, and your temperature conditions, etc., are quite different from your ambient temperatures and pressures in land. So that's the reason why they, they take that precaution. They are worried that it might create explosions. And it's also because some of the accidents have already happened. So, for example, Tesla Model S battery battery had a fire due to battery puncture from collision in 2013. It's not very old ones. It's just recent incidents that you can see that there were issues due to batteries. Now, this was a cargo plane fire in 2006, and the possible reason identified was lithium-ion batteries kept in the backside of the flight. And in 2013, also Boeing 787 Dreamliner battery fire in Boston. This is another example of battery-based accident. I'm not saying that accidents cannot happen using lithium-ion batteries. Even in those cases, accidents are there. But with lithium-ion batteries, depending upon the size of the battery, the extent of accident might be huge. And since we already know there are issues with its operation, I think it is a good time that we start looking at what can be done to overcome these accidents. So, like I mentioned, there are various capacity failure mechanisms that happen in a battery. So I've pointed out about explosion and heating issues here. There are also other issues like fast draining or slow charging mobile phones or laptops and so on. So when you charge your newly bought device for full charge, it might stay up to 24 hours. But after a few months or years, the charge that is the full charge may not stay as long as we expect. And there is also mechanical fatigue issues and so on. But all of these issues are due to poor health of the battery, which is a result of various capacity failure mechanisms or side reactions that happen inside them. I've already mentioned this briefly in the last lecture, but to give you an example of a capacity failure mechanism, SEI layer formation or solid electrolyte interface formation is such example. Okay, so here what happens is that during charging, solvent or electrolyte, which is represented here, will react with a carbon electrode in the negative electrode and form a solid. So here, as you can see, there is some lithium ions that has been used in this reaction. So now SEI layer forms and gets deposited in the interface between solid and electrolyte, and now this, as you already know, lithium ions are shuttling between two electrodes to create the current. So now from that, let's say we had 100 lithium ions shuttling between the electrodes to give you the desired current. Now out of this 100, say 5 of them were used up in the solid electrolyte interface formation. Now you have only 95 ions to shuttle between that. So correspondingly, there is a reduction in capacity. That is exactly what I mean by capacity fade mechanism. Okay. Similarly, there is lithium plating. So lithium plating occurs usually during overcharging when you plug in the battery for longer time than expected. Lithium plating may occur. Here, lithium ions will form a solid or metallic lithium and will deposit on the surface of the interface, on the interface between the electrode and the separator, negative electrode and the separator, in dendritic structure. So what happens is that, let's say it forms on the this interface on the negative electrode. Because of this dendritic structure, so it is randomly getting deposited at different locations on this interface and as elongated dendritic structures. Now, if there is more and more deposition, there is a chance that this length of this dendrite might become equal to the length of the separator, and it will go and test the positive electrode surface. Then it will result in a short circuit, and which is not desired. So there might be chances of explosion. Okay, so here again, you can see that there is lithium ion that earlier is getting used up in forming metallic lithium, and because of this, there is a reduction in active lithium ions that can be used for shuttling between the two electrodes. Okay. So you can see that there is a reduction in capacity even with lithium plating. Now, what are all the challenges that we have to address when you want to use our lithium-ion battery for our devices and so on? So, first thing is that we need to know at any point of time what is the maximum available capacity, or also what is the currently available capacity. One thing is maximum available capacity, which says that when you charge 100%, how much are you going to get? And another thing is actually how much charge do you have at this point of time? Is it 55% or is it 60%? So most of the laptops or mobile phones actually show you this, right? It has 55% charge or 60% charge and so on. But it doesn't tell you that this 100% has reduced. So initially the 100% might be equivalent to 10,000 milliampere hour, but later after a year, the 100% might be equivalent to 8,000 mAh, right? But the device still shows that it has 100% charge, right? When you charge it, it reaches 100%. It doesn't tell 100% with respect to how much mAh. That is the issue that we are facing. That is why we are not able to actually understand whether the 100% will stay up to 16 hours or 24 hours. Of course, there is a difference between usage. Like you might be using it for high, you might be running multiple heavy applications, so it will drain faster. But even irrespective of that, if your usage remains the same, with the reduction in capacity, you should be able to identify that. But that feature is missing in almost all the devices. Another aspect is how does one diagnose poor health of the batteries while the battery is in use? So if I can get an information a priori that some lithium plating is happening and it is close to the positive electrode, the dendrite length is almost close to the positive electrode, so you take precautions. So the driver, if it's an electric vehicle, the driver can take a precaution. He can stop, he can replace the battery, or he can stop driving for a while so that it doesn't result in a sudden explosion and things like that. There are other questions as well, like how to optimize the charge cycles, or how often do we need to replace the batteries? How do we ensure safe operation of the battery, or how do we improve the battery life? So one thing that you have to keep in mind is that although it is impossible to reclaim the lost capacity, we may not be able to recover lithium ions that has become metallic lithium, right? We may not be able to recover the lithium ions that have become solid electrolyte interface. The only thing that we can do is that we can do a periodic diagnosis and control, and we can ensure that this HCl layer formation or lithium plating or other side reactions, these are not the only reactions possible. I've just given you 2 examples. So with periodic diagnosis and control, we can ensure that such capacity field mechanisms are happening in a less proportion than what was there before. This can help us in prolonging their lifetime. Now, in our work, what we have looked at is we have looked at 4 different pillars of systems approach. The first one being the modeling, or mainly capacity field modeling. Next being the control, especially the control charge cycles. The third one being online fault diagnosis, and the fourth one being state estimation. You've already seen these aspects, model, the importance of model, controller, diagnosis, state of charge estimator in the last lecture, but I'm just going to give you what we have done from our group for these 4 aspects. For capacity field modeling, this is mainly for modeling of for design and control. So here we have developed a generic reaction kinetic approach to model various capacity field mechanisms. We have included lithium plating and HCl layer formation. We have also developed a stochastic model for lithium plating. I'll go into the details of this in a couple of minutes in the next few lectures. And the next aspect is control. For control, what we have done is we have implemented a model predictive controller. I'm not sure whether you are from engineering fields, those who are from chemical engineering or electrical engineering or even mechanical engineering might understand a controller, technically what it means. But if you don't understand, controller is something that controls the system at like the way we want. It will control the system. Okay, so the model predictive controller is actually one type of advanced controller which works with the help of a model. Now here, when we implemented MPC, what we tried is to find an optimal trade-off between fast charging and lifespan. So when you charge a battery at high current, we will get fast charging. But the issue is that when you charge a battery at a higher current, there are capacity losses. There will be more amount of side reactions that will happen. So it will affect the lifespan. So what I'm trying to say is that whenever we go for fast charging, there is a demerit that it might reduce the lifespan of the battery. So we were trying to find an optimum between these trade-offs. Now, thirdly, what we looked at is online fault diagnosis. Currently, there are no methods which can work well for online fault diagnosis in batteries. Impedance, I'll discuss what impedance is in a bit, but just keep in mind that impedance is a metric that can help you determine whether the battery is operating in a specific condition or in some other condition. So impedance is generally estimated using a technique called EIS, but it has limitations when it comes to applications in online impedance estimation or online diagnosis. So we have come up with an alternate technique with the help of chirp signals. I'll discuss this as well in the next, after a couple of slides. And we've basically developed an alternate technique which has the potential to be implemented in online applications. Finally, we have also implemented some state of estimators with the help of neural network models. First one was state of charge, dynamic prediction of state of charge, and another one was state of health based classification. We used a random forest classifier and a random forest algorithm, and the next one was neural network based algorithm. If you don't understand, don't worry about it. Here, I just wanted to give you a flavor of different system approaches that can be implemented. For this talk, I'm going to focus on these two aspects: capacity fit modeling and online fault diagnosis. So this is a picture that you are already familiar with in the last talk. So here I just want to give you how these four aspects come into picture in online implementation. So when it comes to online implementation, we will collect the data from the battery using a data acquisition system, and we'll send it to a diagnostic tool and state of charge estimator. And the information from this will be sent to the model and MPC, which is a controller, and the optimal decisions will be taken by an optimizer inside it, and the controller will make sure that the battery is operated in that conditions. Okay. Now let's first look at the capacity fit modeling aspect. So there are generally, when it comes to modeling, there are two aspects. We need a detailed model which is very accurate and captures all the mechanisms happening inside them. But this is only useful when it comes to behavioral analysis, multi-cell design, and so on. However, when it comes to online implementations, we may not be it may not be possible to use this detailed model because of the computational difficulties. So we might be interested in simple models as well. But here I'm going to discuss. I'm not going to discuss the actual model. The actual model could be either detailed model or a simple model. Here I'm just going to discuss how we can incorporate various capacity fit mechanisms into these models, be it a detailed model or a simple model. How do we incorporate the side reactions? That is all my question. Okay, so here this is the ideal battery model that we have already discussed. This is the model developed by Fuller in 1994, Fuller, Doyle, and Newman in 1994. This is called as a self-sandwich model. It is also a P2D model and so on. So here, this is the structure that we have already discussed. So there are two composite electrodes, both made up of spherical particles, and we are considering diffusion in x direction as well as in diffusion in radial direction inside each particle. So mass and energy balance has been written for this system, and we'll obtain partial differential equations and differential algebraic equations. So I of the previous presenters would have discussed the detailed first principles modeling. I'm not going to go into any of those details, but I want you to understand is that there will be some partial differential equations or differential algebraic equations, or some differential equations that we'll, so that we can get the internal parameters, voltage, current, and so on. Okay. Now, there is one equation that would have come up in your previous lectures, which is called as Butler-Volmer equation. So, generally, when you model any of the battery systems, this Butler-Volmer equation is always, appearing in each of the models. But it's like, usually when I started working on electrochemical systems, I used to be scared of this equation because I didn't know how it came about or why people use it. So basically, Butler-Volmer equation is nothing but a rate equation. It is derived from a rate equation. So just to give you a quick idea of what it is, let's say I have so here I have shown, both the negative electrode and positive electrode reactions. So this one is for negative electrode and this one is for positive electrode. In either case, all you can see is that there is some reaction which is going. So here, for example, I have considered the oxidation reaction. You can write the reduction reaction as well as forward. But for example, let's consider the negative electrode where the oxidation is occurring in the forward direction. So most of you would have learned about rate equation either in your schooling or in your college. So we can write a rate equation, overall rate equation for this set of reactions. So when you write it, there is as well as a back. So corresponding to a forward reaction, the rate equation will be K oxidation. K is a rate constant, K into concentration of A and minus the whatever happened in the reversible case. So minus K reduction into Cb. So here I have assumed that for Cb I have assumed that all the reactions are first order. That is, I don't have any power. The power on Ca and Cb are still 1. So that is why it is referred to as first order reactions. Now, this is quite straightforward. This we have been seeing in many of your undergraduate studies, or even in I think 10th or +1 testing. So this Butler-Bowman equation looks something like this. It looks quite complex, but all you have to understand is that this is nothing but it is derived from this rate equation. So the rate equation is the rate represented as R. If you multiply R with N into F, N is the number of moles and F is the Faraday's constant, you will get the current density. Now, if you simply multiply N into F, you won't get this kind of expression, right? It is just some rearrangement by including some electrochemical aspects. But all you have to understand is that it is derived from this rate equation. As far as you have, so J, you can simply write it as NF into this particular term. Okay. Now, eta is an overpotential. I'm not even going to discuss all of those. You might have heard all of these terminologies before. I don't want to get into those details. But what I'm trying to say here is that when people try to model various capacity field mechanisms in literature, what they do is that they will write, they'll treat Butler-Bowman equation as the fundamental equation, and whenever there is an addition, so this is the reaction that is happening at the electrode surface. When there is a side reaction, there is an additional reaction that is happening here. Now, what they will do is that they'll write one Butler-Bowman equation for this desired reaction and another Butler-Bowman equation for the side reaction, and simply write that the total current density J is a sum of these two side reactions, which didn't make sense to me because both the side reactions and the desired reactions have the same common element, which is lithium ion. Right, so here I've just given the examples here once again so that you can see this for yourself. Here for both the both the desired reaction, lithium ion is being present. For the side reaction as well, there is lithium ion that is being present, right? So they have a common element. So when you write this rate equation, you should not write the rate equations independently for the desired reaction and the side reaction, but instead you would write it as together. For example, let's look at the previous reaction, A giving B plus and electrons. Let's say this is the additional side reaction that is happening on that electrode surface. Then you will simply write the overall reaction rate as this, where there is an additional term here. So K side into the Cb. Here I'm assuming that D is present in excess. So this is still first order in B. Now I can write this rate equation which incorporates both the side reaction as well as desired reaction. And now if I follow the exact same procedure as I followed in the previous slide when I had just the desired reaction, I'll get a Butler-Bowman equation. So if you look at it, you can just go back and look at both the equations. What you will see is that this form is exactly the same. The only difference is here in the rate, the J naught that is available here. So here there is an additional K side in the equation. So that is the only difference that is being here. Okay. So this is kind of a reaction kinetic approach that we have proposed. What we are saying is that side reaction that you have, you don't simply assume that the Butler-Bowman equation is the fundamental equation, but you go back to the fundamental rate equation and add that side reaction and write the rate equation. From there, you will be able to derive whatever form that you need from the fundamental expression, rather than simply assuming that they can be linearly superposed and simply added to get the total current density. So there are some equations, but I hope you are staying with me here. Even if you don't have to worry about the complex model structures, all I'm saying is that it is important that you go and look at the fundamental aspects rather than assuming that somewhere in the middle of the derivation you pick one reaction, one equation and say that that is the fundamental equation. That is not the way to. Okay, so here to implement this particular reaction kinetic approach, what we have done is we have tried to simulate two side reactions using this approach. One was SEI layer formation, which I have marked here. On the surface of each of these spherical particles, I have said that there is one layer that is formed because of the solid electrolyte interface. Now, I've also incorporated lithium plating. Like I mentioned before, lithium plating will, so basically lithium plating is the formation of metallic lithium. Metallic lithium will form on this interface between separator and negative electrode. They will deposit as elongated dendritic structures. We have incorporated both of these side reactions using this reaction kinetic approach. But this reaction kinetic approach will only give you how to incorporate the side reactions in the calculation of current density. But it is not going to tell you what will happen to the product formed. For example, there is SEI layer formation. So SEI is formed. It is not capturing the deposition of SEI around the spherical particles. It is not capturing the metallic lithium that is going, and how the metallic lithium form will go and deposit on this surface. We'll discuss that in the next slide, but for now, just understand that we come up with a strategy to model that as well. Okay. So we incorporated both of this and then we simulated the battery cycling for 2000 cycles, and we've compared the result, the discharge cycles for various cycles with respect to the experimental data. So here is an example, here is a result that we have obtained for 4 different cycles. This is for the first cycle, 822nd cycle, 1545 cycle and 1968. Okay. So close to 2000 cycles. As you can see, this is the total capacity. So initial capacity was around 2.2 and it got reduced to around 1.7 or 1.8 within 2000 cycles. So in ampere hours. So here I've compared the simulation results, which is in the lines, with the experimental results, which are marked using some markers. As you can see, the model is able to capture the trends in the experimental data pretty well, right? So you can see that this is conceptually correct. Okay, now as I mentioned before, the generic reaction kinetic approach will only let you know what is the contribution of side reaction in current density. We don't know what happens to the metallic lithium, how it is being deposited. Theoretically, what happens is that the metallic lithium will go and deposit on this interface here like a dendritic structure. Initially, they will form some nuclei-like structure. Small amount of metallic lithium is formed and they will form a nuclei-like structure. But later, it will form this elongated structures, and then with further deposition, they will form this dendritic structure. Okay. So for simplicity, what we have assumed is that for now, it's only forming nuclei-like structures or rod-like structures. We haven't considered the dendritic structures. It is easy to consider. It's just tedious to include this dendritic formation. So for now, we haven't included that. And what we have done is that, let's say this is the interface, the length and width of the interface. So what we have done is that we looked at the interface and we said that, let's say there are different circular sites where the lithium deposition can occur. So for example, this is one site, this is one site, this is one site, and so on, that we have captured as different circles. So the circles could be of different diameters, saying that the diameter of deposition could vary. For example, here the diameter is small, here this is larger. So to capture that effect, we have looked at sites of different diameters. Now what we said is that given, so since I can find the current density contribution from each plating, we were able to calculate the amount of metallic lithium formed. So once we have the amount of metallic lithium formed, what we did is that we developed a stochastic model. When I say stochastic model, we basically so there is a probability associated with the deposition. So for each site, so let's say there is a small amount of metallic lithium that is formed, it can occupy any of these sites, right? So randomly it will choose one of the sites. For example, let's say you toss a coin, it can either fall as a tail or a head. Now when you actually do a coin toss, at times you will get a head, at times you will get a tail. So there were only two choices, so you were getting only these two options. Here there are thousands of sites available to pick, so randomly it will pick every time there is a metallic lithium formation. So this is what was happening, and we actually clubbed this partial differential equation along with the stochastic model to interact between each other. So the PDE model was giving the information about the amount of metallic lithium that is formed to the stochastic model, and the stochastic model will capture how these dendrites are formed and give that length and the size as the information, and will give that information back to the PDE model. Remember, I discussed stochastic model as a way of modeling in the last lecture. So I also mentioned that stochastic model cannot be used for modeling the actual battery behavior. It can only be used to capture certain aspects in a battery. Just like that, here we are using stochastic model to just capture the feature of lithium plating. The actual battery, the true battery model, is still the model developed by Fuller in 1994. Okay, so the PDE model is there, and the stochastic model just acts as a way to capture lithium plate. Okay. Now here is the simulation result. As you can see, initially there is this nuclei-like formation, and later it will form elongated structures and at random locations, right? So this is exactly what we wanted to capture. The only difference is that we have not captured the dendrite formation, right? So here we are not we have not looked at the possibility that there will be sideways deposition, or at any location you can have a deposition at an angle. That we have not considered. But as you can see from the picture that I showed you earlier, you can see that it is quite similar to what is there proposed fundamental structure of lithium plating. Okay, so now this is just one realization. So for the same amount of lithium plating, I could have deposited here instead of here, or here instead of here, and so on. So every time you do this simulation, you will get a different dendritic pattern, right? So now, what is the use of this model, or why should I capture where this dendrite will form, and so on, right? So one use of this lithium plating model is that we can the major issue related to lithium plating is that it might result in short circuit. Now, if you can predict the probability of occurrence of this short circuiting at any point of time, it will really help us in determining whether we should replace your battery or whether we should continue using the battery for some more time and so on. So now, how do we find this probability of short circuit? So one helpful feature, helpful algorithm is Monte Carlo simulation. Don't worry about this big funda name. It is simply that, let's say you want to find the probability of getting a head or tail when you toss a coin. What will you do? Let's say you give the and ask them how many times will you get a tail or a head when you toss a coin. What he or she will do is that he'll toss the coin some say 10 or 100 times and note down how many times you have gotten tail and how many times you have gotten head. Exactly is what a Monte Carlo approach is. If you have a stochastic or a stochastic process to capture the probability of something, what you will do is you will repeat the same experiment thousands of times and note down what is happening in each of the realization. For example, we have done 10,000 realizations, and what we have done is at any point of time we note down the maximum dendrite length that was happening in that particular realization. Okay, so let's say I'm fixing the time. So in that particular time, I know how much metallic lithium has formed, and among that metallic lithium, using that metallic lithium amount, I can generate 10,000 realization. So in each realization, the dendrite pattern will be different. So the maximum length achieved by the dendrites will also be different. So I note down that maximum length and I'm just plotting that maximum length here in the x-axis, and like I'm looking at how many realization I had with each length. Now what you can see is that all this 10,000 realization I have basically looked at a histogram of that. Now let's say the length of the separator is 2.5 into 10 power minus 5 meters. So which is I've shown has this red dashed line. Now what I'm saying is that all stations within this above this particular line had at least one dendrite which is longer than the separator length, which means that in all of those realizations you will have one dendrite starting from the negative electrode surface and touching the positive electrode surface. Means that in all of these reactions, which the number of realizations you can find by looking at the area under the curve, but in all of the realizations you can capture the there will be a short circuit in all of these realizations because there will be at least one dendrite that will have the length greater than the length of the separator. Okay, so in this way we were able to capture the probability of short circuit. Here for the sake of explanation, I've exaggerated the amount of plating. That is why you are getting around what is the percentage? 43% of failure at 2000 cycle or 1700 cycle. But this, I just wanted to give you a flavor of how you can find the probability of short circuit using lithium plating. So note that this is again a stochastic model. So every time you simulate it, you might get a different pattern, but you can use that repeatedly to get an idea of probability of failure. Okay. Now that is all I wanted to discuss about the capacity phase modeling, the work that we have done with regards to capacity phase modeling in our group. Now I want to give you an idea of online fault diagnosis. So there are different methods for diagnosis. None of them are really accepted so far as the best technology. So people are still researching upon fault diagnosis. Now one technique that people generally like to use is electrochemical impedance spectroscopy. Basically, like for those of who are familiar with control, this EIS or electrochemical impedance spectroscopy is nothing but frequency response analysis. For those of you who are not familiar with control, just ignore what I've just said. Okay, so all you have to understand is that this is a technique for impedance. Is just like so when you have an electrical circuit, for example, a resistor, the resistor has a resistance. But when we talk about capacitor or a inductor, we'll say that it has an impedance. In some sense, it is giving you the resistance, but in a complex plane. Okay, so this is the here I've shown you the impedance plot for a different lithium electrode for a lithium electrode at different charge conditions. So as you can see here, charged lithium particular structure, but when it became completely discharged, it has a completely different impedance plot. When it is over discharged, it has a very different profile. It is slightly over discharged, it has a slightly different profile. So what you can see is that at various charge condition or health condition, the electrode has completely different structure in our Nyquist profile or impedance profile. Okay, so what this means is that impedance of a battery is a signature of its health, and because of this, let's say at any point of time, if you want to diagnose battery's health, you can simply take the impedance plot of the system and you will be able to map it to the health of the battery. So let's say you got some impedance profile like this, then you can say, okay, this is completely discharged lithium electrode. Or if you got this particular impedance profile, you can simply say, okay, this is slightly overcharged lithium electrode and so on. So impedance is a tool for diagnosis. So that is one reason why people still like to use EIS. Right? EIS, though EIS is very useful in diagnosis because it's giving impedance, and the issue is that we cannot use EIS for online applications. This is because EIS uses a very bulky equipment. So if you want to do online diagnosis in a car, you would need that big an equipment installed in a car, which is not very feasible. That is one aspect. Another aspect is that you have to wait for a long time to get this impedance plot. I'll give you a brief idea of why it is like that in a couple of slides. But what we have to do is that every time, even to get a single data point in this impedance plot, we'll have to wait for the system to achieve steady state and then collect some data and then get just one data point in this impedance plot. And we have to repeat this experiment multiple times to get enough data points so that we can get a smooth. So let's say you have a battery, you excite the system with a sinusoidal signal of a particular frequency. So here I've shown you a sine signal. So there is a particular frequency that you can pick yourself and then give that as an input to the battery, and you observe the output response. Let's say you are giving a voltage input, you can observe the current output and so on. Okay, what happens is that when you observe, so here the green line, I just wanted to have a comparison between the input and output. So the green is still the input and the red is the output. So here you can see that initially in the output there is a transient behavior, by which what I mean is that it's not a pure sinusoid, but there are some variations. But afterwards it reaches a steady state, and you can see that the steady state is also a sinusoidal signal. Right? The only difference is that there is some difference in amplitude and there is some phase shift. So there is an amplitude difference of which you can amplitude ratio that you can think of as B by A, the ratio of the output amplitude divided by input amplitude. And there is also a phase lag. Let's say the phase lag is 5. Then this is some quantity. You don't have to worry about what is the implication and so on. So let's say the impedance is simply defined as amplitude ratio into e power I5. Okay, this is for your information. Just think of it as just some variable that you calculate from this amplitude ratio and phase lag. It's nothing but a complex plane representation of this amplitude ratio and phase lag. If you don't understand, just treat it as some just new variable that I define, which has implications in diagnosis. Okay, so now when you excite the system with one complete signal with I don't know how many cycles I have chosen, say 20 cycles I've taken, looked at the output signal, I've waited till the transients die down, I look at the output steady state, and then I look at what is the amplitude ratio and phase lag, I calculate the impedance, and then I can just plot. I'm plotting those two in two different plots. I'll get a single data point in this plot. So let me first explain what a Bode plot is. So this amplitude ratio versus the frequency that you have chosen is plotted in the first plot here, and the phase lag that you have obtained as a function of frequency is plotted here in the second plot. Okay, so when I excite the system with a single frequency sinusoidal way, I get a single data point in this Bode plot. In both each plot, I get one data point. Similarly, this EIS plot or Nyquist plot, this is the impedance plot that I've shown you in the previous slide. So in this plot, what happens is that you still get another single data point. This is so this impedance that I've calculated using this equation, I have simply, that will be a complex number. I'm plotting the real versus imaginary. Okay. So here what I've done is that I've excited the system with a single sinusoidal signal. I got one data point. But what you have seen in the previous plot is a complete graph, right? It is not a single point that you have obtained. How will you get the complete graph? You have to repeat this experiment by taking multiple frequencies. Here you have just one frequency, that is why for that frequency you have obtained one data point here. But if you repeat this for multiple frequencies, you will get the entire plot. So here I've shown you from frequency F0 to F7. So you have so many data points, right? Now let's simply, how long does it take to create this graph experimentally, right? So here I'm just going to give you an idea of different frequency regimes. I've taken decades or 10 times. So 10 power minus 3 hertz to 10 power 3 hertz. Let's say this is what I am interested in. Now, if I excite the system with a frequency 10 power minus 3 hertz, or when I consider a sinusoidal signal frequency, the time period of the signal will be 1 by frequency, right? So that frequency will be 10 power 3. Sorry, the time period will be 10 power 3. Similarly, you can find out the time period for all the signals, right? Now, when you so what I'm saying is that if I need to give one input signal of this frequency, for one cycle it will take 1000 seconds, right? If I want 20 cycles, it will take 20,000 seconds. For example, let's say I'm just taking one cycle, then itself I'll have to wait for 18 minutes to get just 7 data points in the graph. Now, most probably you will not, one cycle may not be enough, because you have to wait till the steady state is achieved. In the earlier graph that I showed you, we had to wait for 3 cycles so that the transients die down, right? So at the end, what I'm trying to say is that if you want a smooth curve, you will need a lot of data points, and if you want accurate amplitude ratio and phase lag, you have to wait for the transients to die down. So one cycle may not be enough. So let's say you need 60 data points, and let's say you need 5 cycles for each signal, then you have to wait for 400 minutes or 6.65 hours. What I'm saying is, just to get the impedance plot of the system, you need to wait for around 7 hours, right? Which is not feasible. You can simply see that this is not possible to apply online. So this can be used as a laboratory kind of experiment, just like I said, let's say I want to determine what is the state of charge of the system at present. You can take it to the lab and ask them what is the state of charge. They will completely discharge it at a fixed current and tell you, okay, this had 55% state of charge when you gave it to me. But that is not enough, right? We still want to know at any instant what is the state of charge. How the battery meter in your phone or in your laptop will show you what is the state of charge at any instant. Now, how can you use this method of EIR for such an application? We cannot, because of the time, the time taken for analysis. So there is a need for an alternate technique for rapid impedance measurement, that is exactly chirp analysis that we have proposed. So to give you a quick idea of what a chirp signal is nothing but a signal with varying frequency. So it has, so for example, this is a linear chirp. Here, this looks quite different from a sinusoidal signal, right? So here, as you can see, the cycle time was becoming lesser and lesser with time. So what happens is that this is a type of signal where each and every data point can be associated with a particular frequency, and that is called as instantaneous frequency. So here in the signal, if you look at this frequency versus time, there is a clear mapping between those two. So here there's a linear profile because it's a linear chirp. Similarly, there is an exponential chirp. As you can see that initially there is a very low frequency, but later the frequency is very high because the time period is very small. Okay, so as you can see here, that is clearly depicted in the exponential type of frequency profile. Okay. Now, what we have come up with is that I'm not going to go into the technical details so much. I just want to give you an idea that there are alternative techniques people are researching upon, and you might be interested in some of these. Okay. So here, what I'm saying is, instead of exciting the system with a sinusoidal signal of a specific frequency, why don't you excite this battery with a chirp signal with a specific predetermined profile of frequency versus time? Okay, so you can observe the output profile for this. For example, I've taken a simple system here. Don't worry if you don't understand what the system is. Basically, what I'm saying is I'm taking a system where the output is related to the input using this differential equation. Okay, now I get an output. If you don't understand what this is, don't worry about it. Just assume that it is a simple system. Okay, simple first order system. Okay, so this is the output that I receive when I use this particular signal. This is a chirp signal on this system as an input. I get this kind of output. Now, what I could see is that this envelope of this chirp signal is exactly matching with the amplitude ratio. Okay, so since this particular chirp signal has a mapping between time and frequency, here I've plotted with it amplitude ratio with respect to time. That is, but earlier when I discussed body flow, I plotted the amplitude ratio with respect to the frequency. So here I was able to plot amplitude ratio with respect to time because I know that there is a mapping between frequency and time. So I use that to plot this amplitude ratio with respect to time, and I've simply overlapped this output chirp response here. As you can see, initially there is some difference, but towards the end, this envelope of chirp is matching exactly with the envelope of amplitude ratio. And similarly, we were able to come to some conclusion about the phase lag. So what we proposed is that instead of using electrochemical impedance spectroscopy for understanding the for identifying the impedance plot of the system, which is a time-consuming process. We can simply excite the system with a single chirp signal rather than multiple sinusoidal signals, and look at the output response, and from the output response we can calculate the phase lag and the amplitude ratio directly. So initially there is some transients dying off, so you neglect the transients and look at the steady state. Look, it's not really steady state, it is a steady state chirp signal, you can say. So you look at this profile after this initial couple of seconds. If you look at this output chirp signal, you can calculate the amplitude ratio and phase lag of the system without needing to excite the system with multiple signals. So just to demonstrate the working, so here is the input chirp signal. So corresponding to this time, I have a corresponding frequency time mapping, right? So at every second I can find this is the corresponding frequency. At this time I have this particular frequency and so on. Okay, so correspondingly I've also plotted the phase about that. So if I use this system, signal on the system as an input, I will get an output response, and I am going to look at what is the outer envelope of this chirp signal. I can approximate that as the output signal amplitude. And then just like what we did before, we divide the output amplitude with the input amplitude to get the amplitude ratio. And phase lag we were able to calculate using this equation. Just I haven't explained to you in detail how we calculate the phase, but basically it is with the assumption that the output signal can be modeled using a chirp expression itself. Okay, but at the end we were able to get amplitude ratio and phase lag, and we were able to generate the Nyquist or the EIS plot. So this is an example where we have generated the impedance plot. For this particular RLC circuit, and you can see that the theoretical impedance is quite matching with the impedance that we have generated from the chirp analysis. Okay, are there any questions? Okay. So to give you an idea of why you should go to a chirp analysis rather than a EIS, here I've given you a quick comparison. The input signal is sinusoidal for EIS, but it's a chirp signal for chirp analysis. Frequency is constant for sinusoidal signal, whereas varying for chirp signal. Now in EIS, the number of signals that you would need depends on the number of frequencies that you are interested in, or number of data points in the impedance plot that you are interested in. But here in chirp analysis, all you need is a single signal, and single signal of length probably time 2 seconds or something like that, rather than 6 hours. Okay, the time required depends on the number of frequencies needed. Here in chirp analysis, it depends only on the frequency range. So for example, if it is from 0.1 Hertz to 10,000 Hertz, you might be able to get the signal, get the chirp response in 2 seconds. But when you go to a wider range in the lower frequency regime, say 10⁻³ to 10,000 Hertz, you can get the chirp response within 100 seconds. Okay, so this is again number of data points. Here in EIS, it is the same as the number of signals, but here the number of data points is same as the total samples in the signal. It is so basically it is a hardware limitation rather than the algorithm limitation. So here I have taken an example where the frequency range is 10⁻³ Hertz to 10,000 Hertz, and the sampling rate is 10,000 samples per second. Now, if you look at just these values here, the number of data points that you get in the plot in EIS is 60 data points using a signal of 2.66 hours. Whereas in chirp analysis, you get 10⁻⁶ samples or 10 power 6 data points in just 100 seconds. You can see the amount of computational time or experimentation time that we have reduced with the help of a chirp signal, right? From 2.66 hours, we have reduced to 100 seconds, and we have also gotten a much more smoother impedance curve, because here you have only 60 data points, we have 10 power 6 data points in the curve. Okay, so we have improved this technique to dual chirp and triple chirp analysis and so on. But I'm now going to the details. We have also implemented the same for an electrochemical system, which was modeled using this electrochemical reactions, and we were able to get the same theoretical impedance using chirp-based impedance analysis. So that is all from me for this aspect. So these two topics I've discussed, the capacity phase mechanism modeling and diagnostic techniques for rechargeable batteries. One thing to note is that here I've only talked about impedance being a tool for diagnosis and how do we get the impedance. There is a second part of research, how you can use this impedance to get the diagnosis done effectively. I haven't discussed that, but that is also one aspect of research that we are looking into. So far we have discussed about the rechargeable battery as a technology. Now let me go to an application point of view. So here battery electric vehicles is one of the applications that people are looking at quite rigorously these days. So I wanted to give you a feel for what are all the research opportunities and what are all the challenges that we are facing when we want to use battery electric vehicles as a day-to-day car or a vehicle transportation mode. Okay. Now, just to give you a quick intro, I'm just going to put on a slide. I hope you are able to listen to it. Anyway, yeah. Okay, so so to give, I just want to give a quick feel of how it works. But there are different types of electric vehicles. We start off with hybrid electric vehicles, where the battery is charged using a regenerative brake system. So here the battery is just used in, it's not the major power source. Here there are some examples. 2014 Honda Accord as a hybrid electric vehicle. Here you cannot charge the battery externally. Okay, so but then later it came plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Again here the battery can be charged either using regenerative brake system or by plugging into external sources. Now, the example here is 2014 Ford Fusion Energy. But the most recent ones are electric vehicles where there is no IC engine component at all. In both of these, we also had IC engine components, but in electric vehicles, there is no IC engine component, and we have to charge the battery by plugging into external sources. So Nissan Nissan Leaf and Tesla Model S, I think Nexon also has a electric vehicle these days. So now, why should we use electric vehicles, right? So we have already seen a quick overview there in the video, but there is no tailpipe emission for electric vehicles. Of course, there are some concerns since electricity is produced from coal. There will be some pollution there. But what we are saying is that at the source, sorry, at the electric vehicle level, there is no tailpipe emissions, so less pollution, low maintenance costs and running costs. There is they are really efficient, and you will get high very good acceleration. They can be recharged overnight on low cost battery, low cost electricity. So the cost of recharge is very low rather than buying petrol or diesel. And they are very quiet. They have less acoustic pollution and have potential for military applications. Now, why shouldn't you use electric vehicles? So electric vehicles being a very nascent technology, there are some limitations associated with it. Are there some challenges? Okay, yes, of course, it's a nascent technology. There are some challenges. First thing is the high charging time. When you have to charge it overnight, if you might be able to use it for certain kilometers. Let's say you are going to go for a long ride and 600 kilometers. You may not be able to do one full charging and do it, use the battery for 600 kilometers. You might have to take a break and charge it for longer time. So you cannot you cannot do it like filling a petrol, which just takes 2 minutes, right? When you have to charge it again, you will have to wait for a couple of hours so that you can use the battery again. It has lower range, but these days the range, people have been researching upon the range, and I think they have improved the range quite a lot. The high capital cost is another demerit. It's I think around 2-3 times costlier than the IC engine based vehicles. So for a middle salaried income people, it will be very difficult to afford. Then there is lack of infrastructure for charging. These days they are coming up, but it's still very limited. It's not like so every couple of kilometers we can see a petrol pump, right? We cannot see a charging station like that. So infrastructure is very limited as of now. Concerns on lithium depletion. What happens if the lithium reserves get because of continuous using? There are also concerns about load shedding. When there is a power cut, we cannot charge the battery, and suddenly what will happen when we use a car? As of now, we can even if there is a 4-day power cut, we can still use our car by just going to the petrol pump and filling the petrol. But we may not be able to do that with an electric vehicle. So because of all of this, there is less social acceptance of lithium battery run electric vehicles. But still, India aims to produce and sell electric vehicles by 2030. Only electric vehicles by 2030. That is, we want to replace all the IC engine based vehicles and just use electric vehicles by in 10 years, which seems like I don't know whether it's a reasonable aim to keep, but if we aim like that, we might be able to replace at least 30% of the electric vehicles by then. But if you want to replace all the vehicles to electric vehicles, we need to address certain issues, right? So I've already discussed some of the merits and demerits. So I've talked about zero emissions, low operating cost, and so on as the merits. But what we have to look at is the demerits associated with it. The high initial cost, long charging hours, charging station or infrastructure, lack of infrastructure. So these are some of the demerits associated with it. Now, government has come up with a lot of subsidies so that people can, are motivated to buy electric vehicles. Then there are, projects going on for infrastructure development. There are also ideas like battery swapping, where the concept is that the car owner will not be the owner of the battery. Instead, you just rent the battery from the battery owners. So instead of having petrol pumps, we'll have battery banks. You will go to the battery bank and just replace battery with a new battery, and you keep on running. So that way you can, you don't have to wait for the battery to complete charging. But there are also issues because of that, since I've already discussed with the way you operate the battery, there might be some side reactions that might happen, and it might result in explosion and so on. So since we don't own the battery ourselves, we might be getting a battery that has been used by some other user, and we have no guarantee on how he or she has used. So there are some challenges there as well, but people are looking at all of this. India has a national electric mobility mission plan 2020, and they've launched various schemes for that. Now, initiatives have also been set up there are initiatives to set up community charging stations. For example, either Grid by Either Energy in Bangalore and so on. There are also possibilities for battery swapping, as I've already discussed. Right now, the question that we should ask is that even if we succeed in all of these strategies, is it possible to meet all of our transportation needs using electric vehicles? So whether it be public, private, long or short drives, are we missing something? So when you look, so this is from my own experience. So I was doing my postdoc in Columbia University when they introduced electric vehicles for the transportation of the staff and students. So one day suddenly, it was actually in the maiden trip or the second trip in a day. So the second trip in the day is around 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, and the drivers had to suddenly stop the vehicle and said, okay, the battery is overheated, we'll have to wait for 20 minutes so that I can use the vehicle again. So for a public transportation which runs on fixed timings, such a incident might affect the efficient operation of transportation. So there are some issues like that when it comes to especially public transport. See, private transport, like personal uses where we use maximum 30 kilometers on an average per day is very convenient using an electric vehicle. But when it comes to public transport, where, for example, a taxi or a bus, which runs from day till night continuously, it might be very difficult because the owner may not find the time to charge a battery, or even if he is able to charge it, when you use it continuously, there are issues like overheating. There's another example which happened in Kerala. They introduced around 10 electric buses for transport, and in the maiden trip, 2 of the buses ran out of charge during their maiden trip. The employees blamed it on the lack of planning by KSRTC, and the KSRTC blamed it on the experience of the employees and so on. So basically it was notified in advance that the batteries may die before the completion of the trip if there are unexpected. But these were not taken into consideration when they introduced these buses. So there's a lot of planning that is needed when we want to introduce batteries for these specific utilities. Okay, so basically to answer the question that I discussed earlier, if we can succeed in all of these strategies introduced by the government, will it be possible to meet all of our road transport needs using electric vehicles? We are not there yet. Safety is a major challenge. Of overheating may result in thermal runaway and explosion. We might not. There might be vessels here and there stuck because they ran out of charge, and unless we plan it accordingly. There is also possible short circuit with capacity fade. So the major challenge is when it comes to public transport or long range driving rather than personal vehicles. Personal day-to-day life, for example, I'm coming from my quarter to my office every day. All I'm using is distance. So on an average, I'm doing 10 kilometers per day, and I can easily use a battery electric vehicle. But this is not the case when it comes to a taxi owner, right? So we definitely need a lot of planning and knowledge when it comes to implementation of these electric vehicles for public transport. There are battery management systems, which I've already discussed. It has two main roles. One is to determine the state of charge, state of health, and so on, and the other one is to operate the battery in a safe and efficient way, right? So battery development of a very good battery management system is a research topic that people are interested in at this point of time. Again, these are some of the possible avenues for research. Like I mentioned, better BMS is definitely one. We need to incorporate fast fault detection and diagnosis algorithms. And battery chemistry is mainly for experimental studies. There are also design and optimization studies to improve battery chemistries. Then better charging strategies and infrastructure is another area that people can look at. Whether can we extend the range of the battery electric vehicles? This is also under research. People try to include IC engine associated with a generator or a fuel cell. There are also research on recycling used batteries or second life batteries. Usually we throw out our batteries when the battery capacity has reduced to 80%. Now, but one thing that to note is that it still has 80% capacity. Can we use it again? How do we utilize the remaining capacity? Can cost-effective solutions can be made? Reduction in cost, impact on the grid optimization, all of these are also there. But at the end, there are a lot of questions that still needs to be addressed. Some of them I've given here for your own reference. Some of them are like, is it possible to predict possible battery failures in electric vehicles a priori so that the driver can take necessary precautions? How do we ensure robustness, reliability, and longevity of electric vehicles, and so on? Basically, all of these research opportunities are to ensure hassle-free operation of electric vehicles. Okay, so to conclude, I've given you an introduction to systems approach for the design and operation of rechargeable batteries. I've mainly discussed modeling and diagnosis. I've briefly gone through control and state estimation today and in the last lecture. And I've explained a reaction kinetic approach to model capacity fade mechanisms and chirp analysis method for rapid impedance measurement. And I've given a brief overview of the challenges and research opportunities associated with electric vehicles. With that, I think I've given you some references, but with that I will conclude my lecture today, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rashmi. It was very nice. It was, in fact, flawless. I was in particularly amazed by the fact that the chirp analysis is quite a fast technique, and it's also very effective. Like I remember spending hours together trying to analyze my fuel cell system using conventional impedance spectroscopy analysis, and this one can give you the exact results. I mean, the chirp analysis can give you the exact results within a minute or two. So that's really interesting and as well as amazing as well. So
yes, we are still researching on it. Like this is still, but we have tried it on a variety of systems, both mainly simulation studies. Experimentally, we have really tested it on electrochemical systems. We have tested it on RLC circuits and it works well. So we are the next stage is testing it on actual electrochemical systems, and we are working on it.
Amazing, amazing. So I thank you for that. Now we'll take questions from the audience. Yes.
Madam, in
Good morning.
BMS.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Good morning, madam.
Yes, Siddha.
Okay, yes. It was a very good presentation. We could get lot of information, particularly because I'm on the electrical side, and I am more interested on modeling and simulation of these battery cells, everything. I was working on battery management, energy management system. So it was really very helpful. I had some of few clarities to be done, madam.
Yes.
One of the things is in one of the slides you were telling that if it is slightly over discharging or if it is very much over discharging. What exactly you mean by over discharging, madam? Because
yes. So usually there is even though we say that it is from 0% to 100% discharge and charging and so on, it is basically based on the voltage curve. So voltage, for example, for lithium-ion battery, it is generally from 4.2 volt to 3 volt. Okay, so we can still go down below the 3 voltage. But that's not desired. So we generally keep it between 3.2 voltage, 3 voltage to 4.2 voltage. Okay, so 3 voltage is considered as 0% and 4.2 is considered as 100%. But if you go below that, it is over discharged.
Oh, okay, thank you. And when you're talking about amplitude of impedance, you have taken the ratio as B by A, where B was the amplitude, peak to peak amplitude of current, and A was the amplitude of V, voltage. So is
it is actually such. I think I've missed the convention there. It is basically, it's not peak to peak. It is just amplitude.
Okay, amplitude only. But you have taken that ratio as B by A. Should it have been A by B?
It
The
is
input that we are applying is the voltage, right?
No.
And later what you were measuring was?
Yes, so it depends on whether you have given voltage as an input or current as an input.
Okay, accordingly that
accordingly you can, yes. So here I haven't really given it as voltage or current. I've simply set it as input and output. So generally it is for electrical systems, you will accordingly take the current and voltage. That's why impedance is voltage by current. It is always voltage by current.
Okay. Then how to perform this dual chip and triple chip analysis, madam?
So I haven't discussed that today in the interest of time, and I was not sure whether how much technical details it would be. You can read I've already published a paper on dual chip analysis. You can find it in my website. Yeah. So triple chip analysis, we are yet to publish, but basic idea is the same. So in dual chip analysis, instead of perturbing the system with a single chirp signal, we use 2 chirp signals. And in triple chirp analysis, we excite the system with 3 chirp signals. So the experimentation wise, it is almost the same. Analytically deriving the impedance, there is some slight difference in each method. You will find it in my paper. Okay. If you are interested, please go and
that paper. Okay, yes. I'll go through that paper. And when you are comparing with regular vehicles and hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles, you are saying that electric vehicles have low maintenance cost. But generally what we have observed is whenever we have electrical system in a vehicle, it is found that the maintenance cost is high whenever we go for servicing. Because
okay, that's probably because I think it is also because now it is a nascent technology. There are very limited service options, and the cost of components are pretty high. But otherwise, so I think
You are talking about actually the fuel cost, probably.
yes.
Madam, one more thing. Is there any work done on the chances of reversing the dendrite growth, madam? You said that the dendrite will go on growing, okay,
Yeah.
into first cylinders and then into that dendrite-like structure. Okay,
So
is there any possibility of reversing it so that we can, because that was one
that's
of
a
the
good
main
question.
reasons for capacity
Yes.
reduction.
Yes, so that's a very good question. I haven't seen any research on trying to reverse the mechanism as it is, but there are conditions in which some of these metallic lithium form will get reversed as lithium ions. That is mainly because of some operating conditions. But I don't know whether there is already some research that has occurred which look at the possibility of reversing the lithium plating. That's probably a very good, research opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you very much, madam, for the interaction.
Yeah, thank you.
Madam, in BMS, there is two things, SOC and SOI. What is that full form, SOC and SOI?
SOC is the state of charge and SOH is the state of health of the battery. So SOC is nothing but, so in your mobile phone and laptop, it will show the 50% charge or 60% charge. That is exactly what a state of charge is. But state of health is more of, from the initial capacity, the maximum capacity, with time, the maximum capacity will get reduced. So like I said, initially when you buy a battery, it might have 10,000 mAh capacity, but later after a year, it might have just 9,000 mAh, right? But nowhere in the battery it shows, right? It still shows 100% capacity, but initially when it's in capacity, it is talking about 10,000 mAh, but after a year, it is talking about 9,000 mAh. So that difference is still not incorporated in any of the devices. So if you can incorporate that, that will be a good idea. So that you can accurately know how much the battery will stay.
One more question. And there are two examples I've shown. And the second example, exactly what was the root cause in that Kerala case?
So it was mainly probably, I think it was also the traffic. They haven't, thought about the traffic probably. And the distance, I don't know, I haven't followed up on what actually went wrong, but one of the reasons it mentioned is that there was traffic and they did not account for the traffic. So the distance they've just kept some 10% extra charge or something like that. So they needed a charging station in between so that they could complete the whole range.
Okay, madam. Thank you for your information. Nice talk and great, something new.
Thank you.
Madam, that Kerala problem was not a real problem, I think. If they had planned well and gone for
exactly.
backup,
So, like I said,
probably,
lack of planning is a major issue. So this is quite new. So people are still not aware of the challenges. They are not aware of what can be done to overcome some of these issues. So I think, so lack of planning is definitely an issue.
Yeah, that's not a great problem. It can be still. Backup is very much essential when you go for electric vehicles.
Yes, but it's not like changing a tire. You cannot, so the drivers may not be equipped to change the backup, even if they have a backup. So that is one other issue. So tire, you can have a backup when it has a puncture, you can, immediately change it. Most of them can do it themselves, but battery, they may not be able to do it. So that is not. So there are some implications. So whenever you use a battery vehicle, electric vehicle, usually it has, monitors which shows the amount of charge remaining and so on. And the drivers have to be equipped with that. So if they don't know how to read those signals and take precautions, that is also another issue.
And with the government coming up with more and more charging stations, probably.
Yes, all of these issues will be overcome.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, any more questions?
Yes, Dr. Vinod Kumar, are you asking a question? I cannot hear you.
I think he is just unmuted by mistake.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, anyone? No, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Rashmi. It was quite a wonderful talk. I think participants have at least understood what chirp analysis is and how it is more efficient than than the conventional impedance spectroscopy.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Now we'll have a quick break, and we'll come back with this next session at 11:30 hours.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam.